welcome back. We are getting towards the end here. We're coming up on sort of discussing the big ideas of how we lead into a sustainable future, starting with renewable and non-renewable energy. This is chapter 15, which is non-renewable. That will be the first video, and the second will be renewable energy. They go really well together. I know that you did your home footprint and looking at your house and how much energy and resources you actually need. If you haven't done that before you watch these videos, I actually think it'll help you think through some of these things. That shouldn't take too long. And then I want to get started. All right, let's talk about energy. So what do you remember from Bio 1 or physics or any of the other classes that you've taken about what exactly is energy? Where does it come from? What do we use it for? We talk about it like this sort of imaginary thing that powers our lives, but energy is actually measured in the capacity to do work. And work is a measurement of what we can move something from one place to the other, or carry someplace, or cause a change to happen. In biology, we describe work in the body often as changing proteins. Proteins get some energy added to them in the form of ATP. That energy in the ATP molecule is passed to a protein or a different kind of molecule, and it changes its structure. When we use it in the home or we use it in our everyday lives, sort of outside of our bodies, it often means to allow some changes to happen, like light to be turned into images that we can see, or processing power to illuminate a room, to run machines that we would otherwise have to do that work by hand. I have some questions for you as we go through this to kind of mull over. Where do we get energy from that is not renewable? And I think you, at this point, have a pretty good idea of what not renewable means. But energy that we use, and then we can't continue to keep grabbing more energy. There's a finite amount on planet Earth. So what are some sources of non-renewable energy that you might be using right now? In fact, you probably are. So when you use them to do work, maybe you're using non-renewable energy like electricity that's coming in from a coal burning plant or a nuclear power plant, depending on where you live. You might be using solar power, which is a renewable energy source. That's the lecture 2 for this week. When we talk about work, we really mean applying force over distance, and power is the rate at which work is done. So when we talk about powering your machines, we're applying watts, and that's what, if you look at your electrical bill for your home or for your apartment, you'll see that you're charged on a monthly basis based on how many watts you use. Joules are the amount of work done when a force of 1 Newton force is exerted over 1 meter, and a watt is 1 joule per second. And if you go out and look at your electrical meter outside, you can actually estimate back and forth on your energy uses in your house. Turn off everything in your entire apartment or your entire house. Go out and look at your electrical meter, and then go inside, turn everything on, and come out and look at your electrical meter and compare what it's actually doing, how fast it's moving. Make sure you're not looking at your water meter, which will give you different readings and looks very similar. In order to light just a standard light bulb, we use about 1,000 watt hours or 1 kilowatt hour. So just so we're all on the same page when we're talking about power. And this week and next week, after you watch these videos, I encourage you to go out and start looking about how power is used in everyday life. It is cheap, relatively. It is available to us all the time. We tend to use it without thinking. And what is the cost of that is something we want to come back and talk about as we go along. All our energy originally comes from the sun. That means, and we've talked about this, I don't know, maybe a month ago, that we talked about food webs are powered by solar energy being picked up by producers, those plants that are able to photosynthesize, which are eaten by consumers. Primary consumers eat plants and convert plant energy, sugar, into animal energy, stored carbs and stored fats and stored nucleic acids and proteins. Then they can be eaten by a secondary consumer. Those secondary consumers convert the energy inside of the primary consumers into more of themselves, as well as some is lost at heat at every single level. We talked about, and it's been a couple lectures, so I wanted to review it. We talked about the laws of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. That's the first law of thermodynamics. It means that energy can only be converted from one form to the other. So we tend to colloquially, as we're just talk about the fact that we're creating energy with power plants. We absolutely are not. We're taking energy in one form, hopefully a high usable form, and we're converting it into a form that is more usable for us as people using that kind of power. The second law of thermodynamics is also going to apply here. As we convert energy from one form to the other, we also lose some of it as heat and as entropy in that conversion. No conversion is 100% effective. You can't have a perpetual motion machine. And that means that every time we convert energy from coal, say, and we burn that coal and we convert it into electricity, a substantial amount is lost to the universe from our point of view, and we can't use that energy again. Only a small percentage of it is converted into something we can use. Most of our energy resources that we use in the United States and frankly worldwide right now are not renewable. Things like oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear energy, that's what the scope of this is going to cover for topic 15. That means that there is a certain amount that is found on planet Earth that we have access to, and ultimately we can use it up. Now, some of these have vast stores. It's unlikely in any reasonable plan of how humans are going to exist that we will use them up. There's also some consequences to these that we've talked about in other lectures and will continue to talk about, that when we burn non-renewable energy sources, there's often things given off like methanes and carbon dioxide or radioactive materials that we have to deal with. There's pollutants that come out of this. Renewable energy are things like solar, using biomass, that's using living like corn and living things, so the mass of the life. Geothermal, which is heat from the ground, and wind. These are renewable. There's probably no way we could use them all up. It's basically an infinite amount of them. Many of them, but not all of them, also have fewer pollutants that they release into the atmosphere. I want to talk a little bit about where our energy actually comes from. Right now, we use about 85% of the energy that we use in the world is coming from fossil fuels and other non-renewable sources. The countries that are richest in the world, in Europe, in North America, are using substantially larger amounts of energy than countries that have less money. We only have about 20% of the population living in areas that are very wealthy, but those 20% are using 80% of the world's power and 80% of the world's resources. As China and India modernize, and they have huge populations, and those huge populations obviously want to have a really high quality of life, the concern is that instead of becoming less resource users, most of the world will continue on the path to having really high resource use. And then we add in another 2 or 3 billion people that are trying to live like the richest part of the world. We are basically using more and more Earths every year, and that's not actually sustainable for us. An end goal there to keep in mind is that the richest countries need to use less and less, and we need to develop technologies that keep the standard of living very high for people, but also have less damage on our environment and don't use up our fossil fuels. It takes energy always to make energy. You kind of learned this in bio. You definitely learned this in physics and chemistry. The amount of energy that you need to start a process is never zero. You always have to add a little bit of energy to start something from happening. If I want to convert energy into a form that I can use, like electricity, I need to start out with a high quality, ideally, source of energy to do that. We talk about net energy. That's the amount of energy that is completely available from a resource that we are using. So the net energy, or the full amount of energy that I can get for coal, is very high. The amount of energy, the net energy that I can get from a rod of radioactive material might be very high. And then every time I convert that into one form or another, as I move it into more usable forms, I actually lose some of the energy that was in my original starting point in order to create usable energy for us. So, for example, oil, we have to find the oil, we have to map where the oil is, we have to build something to get the oil, we have to take the oil up out of the ground or up out of the ocean and transport it to a refinery. In the refinery, we convert that oil and petroleum products into things like gasoline and other products, and then we have to deliver it to consumers. We need to consider all of that cost in our cost of how much energy we're actually getting out of oil, not just the fact that I have oil, digging it out of the ground and pouring it directly into my car. There's a lot of energy high steps in between. The net energy ratio, or the energy return on investment, is the amount of energy I actually get out at the end of the process based on how much energy and money I have to put in at the start. So I'm going to label, as we go through all these non-renewable resources, we're going to talk about what is my net energy ratio, or my energy return on investment. We are looking for things that say high next to them, or medium. Things like hydrogen, which your book goes into a pretty long discussion of, and I'll leave that to something for you to read. Hydrogen is it's being heralded as one of the new ways to avoid climate change in an abundant resource that we can use for energy. But they're actually, when we use hydrogen and we convert it into usable form, it's a negative energy yield or return on investment. Right now, it costs more money and energy to prepare hydrogen for use than it does we actually get out of it. So not a reasonable resource right now, and also hydrogen has some safety issues with it. So I don't know how big this looks on your screen, whether you're watching this on your phone or if you're watching it on a big computer, but I'd like you to look at this chart, which is figure 15.3 in your text, and kind of think about what categories and what energy types in each category have high net energy yields. Things like hydropower, this is dams and water-powered power, wind and coal, all have really high ability for returning our investment on things like powering electricity. For transportation, gasoline actually has a really high return of investment based on, we're going to collect petroleum products. I'll show you in a little bit how we refine them briefly. We actually get a lot of energy out per unit of oil in the gasoline and distance that we drive right now, as compared to biodiesel, which is a renewable resource, but right now the return on energy is really low. We need to consider this and then the cost to the climate when we're looking for new energy sources. Things like passive solar have a really low impact on the environment, but they also have a high initial cost and a very high energy upfront use. Things like hydropower actually are much more efficient if I'm powering electricity. I already have the infrastructure in place in many cases, and I also have to I actually get more energy out per unit. So I want you to consider both. And at the risk of going too long in this lecture, I tend to think that renewable energies in my head are going to be better overall, but consider the fact that the infrastructure is already in place, and if we want to switch energy types over, we're going to have to build a whole new series of infrastructure. It is not impossible. We are in the middle of a changeover worldwide in shifting what kind of energy we use, but consider that cost is going to be, in some cases, exorbitant in order to shift over and then ultimately pay off with a benefit for the environment and for us. Low net energy resources are expensive to bring to market and they need subsidies to compete. And nuclear energy is a good example for this, and I'll talk a little bit about it later too. This is our nuclear power plant. It's in Salem County, which is, just south of Camden County. You can see this as you go over the Delaware Memorial Bridge. You can see the cooling tower. This is not where the reactor is. This is where the steam comes out of the top. The Salem nuclear power plant is an older plant. It's got a couple years left in it, but they take a lot to build. It takes a lot to bring the radioactive material in there and protect it. And every plant that we have right now, it only has a lifespan of about 40 years. Once that lifespan is over, we have to deal with the consequences of creating radioactive material that is going to be dangerous to us for the next 100,000 years or more. Nuclear power is a fairly clean energy, except for that whole radioactivity thing. We want to talk about the density of the energy, basically how much energy is available out of a small unit of input, how much energy can I actually get out. And in the back of your head, I want you to keep thinking what we've been talking about sort of all along. How much energy do I actually need to live the kind of life that I want? Do I really need all the energy I use, or am I using much, much more than I actually need? Am I being wasteful? So all those things to consider as we move into some of the descriptions of what kinds of non-renewable energies we use as people in the world. A huge amount, 85% of our energy is coming from fossil fuels, pretty much. Fossil fuels are flammable hydrocarbons. They're basically long ago sugars. They form from the buried remains of things that have died. They've either gotten compressed under the land or under the water. Coal, almost all coal comes from old, long dead plants. Let's make it with a P. Oil and natural gas are also coming from dead things from a long time ago. Oil and natural gas are coming from things like small planktons, things that used to live in the ocean, or small single-celled organisms that have gotten smushed for a very long time. We talked a little bit about them in the geology lecture. These are things that were once alive, that have built their little bodies out of carbon, and that carbon has been squished underneath the geology of the world. We are able to tap into that and pull it up and then use that as a source of fuel. But they are once alive things, and that's kind of at the heart of why this is a non-renewable resource. We're never going to recreate the situation that was on Earth during the Carboniferous, sort of very early plant life that created these resources for us. I threw in this is fossil fuel consumption by country. When we talk about major uses of fossil fuels, I want you to note that the U.S. is always right at the top. We produce a lot of fossil fuels, but we also use much more than we produce. And then consider everyday's life cycles and our infrastructure, lifestyles, not cycles, our everyday lifestyles and our infrastructure that contribute to our excess use. Conventional crude oil is incredibly abundant. It has a medium net energy yield, meaning that it's pretty good return on investment for us. It does release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that this means it leads to a lot of air and water pollution. We talked a little bit about the fact that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which is okay. The greenhouse gases keep us warm because they keep some of the sun's heat and energy trapped inside of our living space here. But as those levels of carbon dioxide increase beyond what they have been in the existence of humans, a little bit of extra heat gets trapped. And that's our biggest concern with the fossil fuels, is that they add pollutants and acidity to the environment around us, which really changes our living conditions. When we talk about conventional crude oil, this is where we dig down and we pull oil, we pump it up out of the ground from places where there is large stores of things like oil. Unconventional heavy oil can be also taken out of shale. Shale is a type of rock that layers on itself like this. The oil can sit in between it. But in order to get at it, we can't just send a pipe down there and pump it up. We have to shake the ground and crack it. And when we shake the ground and crack it, that oil then can be pulled up out and provide us with an energy source. There are potentially huge resources of that kind of unconventional heavy oil across the US and Canada. We get it out by the process of shaking the earth, that is fracking. Fracking is the thing I showed you in geology that leads to localized earthquakes and man-made earthquakes. This actually has a really low energy yield right now. A lot of effort and energy going into getting it. It's very hard to draw it up and have the infrastructure to pull it out. And then the ultimate payoff is not as high as conventional crude oil. Here. I want to show you some pictures of refineries. I go back here. We're looking at these stacks. This is an oil refinery in Texas. Later I'll show you, you can drive down by the Delaware River at Marcus Hook or Philadelphia, or if you go over the Delaware Memorial Bridge, you can see lots and lots of those towers coming out of our local refineries. What we do is we bring in oil from everywhere in the world, either in the US, or we bring in oil from Venezuela, or we bring in oil from other places, and then we take it into the refinery and we heat it up. As we heat the crude oil up, it goes up a heater and into one of these towers, one of those refining towers. And as it refines, we spread it out based on density and filter it. And we draw out different kinds of oils based on the quality and filtering of the crude oil itself. So we turn it into many different kinds of things by refining it. So this is the Sunoco refinery in Philadelphia. You can probably see this in your everyday life. This is the tower that I am drawing here. We remove components at every level, and at the top, the things that are most likely to turn into a gas rise to the top here and are trapped, and we use those for things like cooking gas. Gasoline is drawn out here, and you can see all the different pipes pulling it away. One of the things that we do a lot in Philadelphia and at Marcus Hook and a couple of the other refineries locally is we ship out a lot of asphalt as well. That is the least volatile, and we use that to pave roads. And you'll see the trains that run from the refineries they run through Woodbury and down through Pittman. Those really slow moving trains are kind of always parked on the side of the road in Woodbury. Those are moving back and forth between the refineries, bringing, in many cases, the components from the refining, but often things like asphalt. My husband works at the Sunoco plant. I actually understand more than I thought about how it works. He's an inspector. So what his job is as we kind of go forward, is he climbs up to the top of all these little towers and he makes sure that they're not leaking and that everything is functioning properly. One of their biggest concerns is actually because all of this is so complicated and in tiny little pipes, water damage causes a massive amount of damage to them, and they have to kind of monitor to make sure that the water isn't corroding the outside of these pipes. Are we running out of oil? Probably not, actually. It feels like this week, and I realize we're making these videos and talking about this in a week where oil has become one of the top stories in the news because of political reasons. But right now, we still have an abundant amount of oil. Now, do we have an abundant amount of easy-to-access cheap oil that we can get at? That's a little bit different. The proven oil reserves are very high. This is a map of countries that are members of OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and they control most of the areas where we have proven oil reserves. Recently, the U.S. has started to create more oil. We opened up drilling in the Alaskan Reserve and a couple other places that opened up huge stores of oil. It used to be a thing to talk about during this class where we would talk about the debate for drilling in Alaska. It's too late. They're drilling now. But as those drilling places have opened up, the U.S. has been able to flood the market a little bit with oil production. We still use more than we produce, even though we're producing a lot more now. Our oil use exceeds our production, even though we produce quite a bit. And if you look, I don't know how these colors will look to you, and you can look at the PowerPoint that I post as well. This is countries by oil exportation, and you can see that the US is really, really high. Canada is really high. The highest producer in the world is Saudi Arabia, followed by Russia. Your book at this point goes into a discussion about how the US is projected to be the highest oil exporter in the world by 2024. That did not play out. What has happened is the US produced less oil than expected, even domestically, which is partly our accessibility and frankly, a lot of the social impact and pushback from not wanting to drill in areas that should be protected, like national parks, that may actually have some mineral and oil reserves in them, but there are social, aesthetic, and frankly, a lot of reasons why those areas should not be damaged by this incredibly heavy, damaging procedure where they take oil and mineral reserves out of an area. Shale oil, I want to show you a little bit of what shale oil really looks like. This is where we do fracking. And we have oil sands and tar sands, primarily in Canada. We get bitumen, which is then it makes very dirty fuel. So that has to be cleaned out. The extraction involves clear cutting an entire area, so cutting down all the trees, destroying all the habitat, making sure that nothing lives there. The return on investment of this is very, very low. It looks something like this. This is the oil sands in Alberta, Canada. It took out an entire boreal forest and all of the things that were connected there, and it's basically strip surface mining. This also uses and pollutes massive amounts of water. You can see the air pollution coming out of this. Some of this is steam. This is steam. And some of this is dust being stirred up from the mining processes. So there's some trade-offs here. Probably not going to go no oil use anytime soon, probably not within our lifetime, but there's definitely some trade-offs between conventional and heavy oil. Conventional oil is what we normally use. The cost associated with it is often that we have to import it, and that raises the price. The net energy use for it is pretty high. It's medium high. But as we use up more and more easily available resources, that cost becomes more expensive. And it leads to political tension when we are competing for availability of oil. If you have been paying any attention at all for the past 2-3 weeks of what's happening in politics in Iran and the United States, and basically bleeding over into everything else, we blocked the strait where the tankers move through, and we've slowed down the movement of oil worldwide, and that has impacted the use and cost of oil in the entire planet, about everyone. That's certainly, I would put that over here in your book words it as vulnerable to international disruptions. It's a high cost resource that is available in very small parts of the world. It also has a lot of potential for pollution. Heavy oil from oil sands and fracking. Yeah, we have a lot of it. Canada has a lot of it as well. But its return on investment is very low, and it is incredibly polluting and damaging. And I would add, also, the process where we get it out, if we are fracking, has been known to cause disruptive earthquakes. So I want to move to natural gas. Natural gas is often touted as an alternative to using oil. It is something that we have available in the ground here. When we pull it up, it is mostly methane, but we also have some propane, butane, and some hydrogen sulfide mixed with that. So it again has to be processed and moved from place to place. It is a very low production cost once we have the infrastructure in place, and we already do. It burns cleaner than coal or oil, and so this has been the argument that natural gas is cleaner and better for the environment. And we basically extract it through both drilling and the big natural gas containers and some fracking, which is shaking the ground. We do have to process it, just like we have to process oil. This is not up the Delaware River, but you can see these going up the Delaware River every once in a while. And there's big containers that you can see, these big white balls that they have areas, and they're all fenced in. Those are natural gas storage. We have a natural gas well. We separate it away from the oil. We store it and allow the oil to filter off. The oil is filtered off and sent to a processing plant where it removes all the byproducts. It removes all of the contaminants that we don't actually want burning in our house. Vented and flared means that we burn off everything at the top, and you can see it in Philadelphia sometimes. You can see the vents with the little flames shooting out of it. They're not on fire, they're actually getting rid of excess material and excess kinds of gas from natural gas production. We then take it and we pack it together really, really tight, and we add an odorant to it. Natural gas has no smell. You cannot detect it in the environment around you, but it is explosive. It can kill you. It's not great to breathe in either. So we add a compound to it to make that stinky, sulfury smell. And if you've worked with natural gas in the labs, you kind of know it has an eggy smell to it. That's been added so that you can detect it. We then, that's the odorant part here. We then store it and ship it off to consumers, which can be industry or it can be you in your house. I use natural gas to cook with in my home. You might too. You might not use electricity. When we transport it, we compress it and create it under pressure, so we turn it into a liquid instead of a gas. That allows us to store it, but these containers are under pressure. You will occasionally see trucks on the highway too, big rounded containers that are transporting liquefied natural gas, and with a lot of stickers on the back saying that they are explosive. Is natural gas the answer to climate change? I don't know. This woman is in Pennsylvania. This area is an area where they have been bringing natural gas up out of the ground, and it's contaminated the water supply. Local people are having a lot of trouble with their water. This is a problem. I don't know how well you can see, but she's holding a match to her running sink water, and it's catching fire. People in the region have to leave their houses with their windows open because otherwise natural gas will get into their homes. This is leaking coming off of the processing of pulling it up off of the ground. I don't know. It definitely has lower carbon dioxide emissions, though. I feel like we should really, though, focus on the fact that it is still releasing a substantial amount of greenhouse gases. It releases methane, which is several times worse of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It right now is very, very cheap comparatively. As that price increases, we could actually shift people over to renewable options probably. It's been a debate back and forth whether you should have the natural gas burning in your house at all and whether that's bad for you. I don't think that we have a final answer on that yet. Coal is a solid fossil fuel. Coal comes from land plants that were formed during the Carboniferous. The Carboniferous period was about 300 million years ago, a span of time. Super cool bio side note, during the Carboniferous period, nothing had evolved the ability to break down the lignin that holds the plants together. It's a compound that makes them stand up a little bit. It's more than cellulose. It's more of a structural compound. So when they died, the plants would lay down and nothing could digest them completely. So they just packed themselves down and created these really thick layers of dead plants. Later, about 290 million years ago, fungus evolved an enzyme to dissolve lignin. The plants that die now get digested by fungus in the forest. You'll see the little white tendrils all over them. But in the past, they didn't. This is a non-renewable resource because we're never going to recreate the situation where plants are dying and not being broken down and returned into the carbon cycle. Coal is mined generally above ground in open-top mines. You can see them as you drive through West Virginia if you've ever been down there. They're used to produce electricity and actually primarily to produce electricity in a substantial part of the world. We in New Jersey get a lot of our electricity from coal-burning plants. I want to show you this little bit of diagram here. This is peat. Peat is made out of moss. It is alive when we harvest it. It is not coal, but it's decayed plant material. You can burn it for a fuel source. And across parts of Ireland and the northern parts of Denmark, people actually still traditionally burn peat as a fuel source because you can just dig it up and it makes a good and kind of nice smelling fuel. If that is subjected to a lot of heat and pressure, and let's add some time here, lots of time, it squishes the moisture out of it and it forms a type of coal over a long period of time called lignite. This has a really low heat content. It's dirty coal. It has a really high sulfur content. It's a very limited supply. This here, somewhere around here, is the dirty coal that was being burned in London in the mid-1900s. I'm not making a mistake there, like 1950, 1952, that actually led to some of the most egregious pollution problems that we have seen in the modern times. The smogs of London in the 1950s were yellow and sulfurous smelling and burning because people were burning cheap, dirty coal to keep their homes warm. And there was the winter of 1952 was very cold. That resulted actually in a climactic condition where the smog got stuck in the city. And we think about 100,000 people over the next couple of years died because of those couple days of dirty coal being burned in concentration and being squished down on London. We don't generally burn these now in the modern lifetime. We're burning something more like anthracite, which really holds a lot of heat. It is a high return on investment kind of coal, has a very low sulfur content. This would be ideal if we were going to burn it as a fuel source. The environmental cost of burning coal, you probably already know. It's a huge amount of the burning process wastes the energy in the coal. When we take coal, we mine it. So it has and in the US, it's mainly mined by machines now. But as it's mined, it's put in pulverized, and then it is used and burned to spin turbines. This means wheels that generate electrical power. And then we condense this material and then we cool it. This is a cooling tower. You see them in many places. It does not mean that it is a nuclear power plant. It means that the plant there is generating heat, and that heat has to be dispersed somehow. It's using heat and possibly boiling water as an energy source, and we need to leave that out to the atmosphere. Mining is devastating to the land around it. We've talked about it during the geology lecture. It impacts the biodiversity. It impacts the stability of the land. It impacts the soil erosion. It impacts the water, the air, the land, absolutely everything. Mining can be, especially open top mining, can be devastating. There's a lot of soot and carbon dioxide released when you burn coal, all kinds of trace minerals that we don't remove from them that are hazardous, particularly in the atmosphere. We do put scrubbers on the top, which is a way to pull out a lot of the pollutants. We use an electrified scrubber on the top of a lot of these plant towers that actually pulls the particles out before they have a chance to release in the atmosphere. But it's actually fairly effective compared to 30 years ago. And then we have a byproduct that we have to store safely. Coal ash is not something that is particularly usable to us, so it's waste material that has to be gotten rid of. I want to show just a quick chart here. This is coal-fired electricity, oil, and geothermal, and how many carbon dioxide emissions they give off per kilo. It's a lot. More than 200 coal-burning power plants have closed in the United States in, I don't know, the data I had was up to 2018, but over about an 8-year period, the coal-burning plants are shutting down. This results in people losing their jobs, and so there has been pushback from that. There's an increasing and growing competition for coal plants from natural gas, but also the wind and solar power. If you've been living in New Jersey and kind of aware of the politics for the last decade, there has been a lot of push to put in wind farms across on the coast. That was pushed back by a huge ad campaign that was saying that those wind farms were going to be ugly and they were going to interrupt the shore and then they were going to cause a lot of damage to birds. It turned out all of those ad campaigns were being funded by fossil fuel companies, so they actually shut them down for now. There's a lot of competition back and forth to get rid of coal because it's dirty and dangerous, but then there's a lot of the coal industry has a lot of power. We do export a lot of our coal to the rising markets in India and Africa and now Asia. So one last type of power to talk about. I want to talk about nuclear power and a little bit about how it actually works. There are 93 nuclear power plants in the U.S. There's you can drive and go see one at Salem Nuclear Power Plant. This is, I don't know, assuming you're in Camden County, it's maybe a half-hour drive from you. This is actually, I think, taken sort of from, this is the Delaware River here. We're heading off to the Delaware Memorial Bridge. It's very low carbon dioxide emissions from nuclear power, but they're really high to maintain. They're costly. And they have that whole radioactive material thing that, and frankly, an image problem, because when they explode, they're very, very scary. The most common fuel that we use for nuclear power is uranium-235. It is naturally occurring. We dig it up. It is radioactive. We form it into these little pellets that are cylinders. They're about 1.5 centimeters long, so that's like an inch. And then we stack them into rods. Those rods are bundled together and we make a fuel assembly out of them. Of those fuel assemblies, they're really, really hot. We bundle them all together and we put them in water, and that becomes the reactor core. They are radioactive. They are already doing their thing. We use their energy, their heat from that radioactivity to power boiling water. And that boiling water is then used to spin a turbine. If we look down on a molecular level of what is happening within the fusion reactor itself, we actually have uranium. This is radioactive. It's radioactive, and when it's radioactive because it falls apart, it's unstable. We hit it with some neutrons, and the uranium-236 is so unstable that it actually splits itself apart. As it splits itself apart, the heat is released from breaking this molecule apart, and it forms a neutron and then a radioactive byproduct. We regulate this by putting it into water, which means these plants use a lot of water. They need to cool the water to make sure this is not too hot. If the cooling system fails, that's when you have a meltdown. When we build nuclear reactor, I want to show you two different ways. The ones in the US are pressurized water reactors. This is I think the only type in the US. Water is circulated through the reactor, and then it absorbs heat. It turns into steam. That steam rises and it spins a turbine, and that's where the electrical generation is coming from. A boiling water reactor is what they had in Chernobyl. We don't have any of those. They're a little bit more unstable. They boil water with the core directly to make steam, and then it's harder to control if the water dries up. It's harder to control the meltdown that later occurs. I do want to point out we can create breeder reactors, and this is where we are breeding more radioactive material. It makes plutonium and other isotopes from our uranium that we are breaking down, and then we get some stable uranium at the end. You run this for about 10 years on the side of your nuclear power plant, and you actually have enough plutonium to start a new reactor. We have to use liquid sodium in this case to cool it, because water is not going to be good enough. But the byproduct here is weapons grade plutonium. So we can create more radioactivity that is usable to us, but that is primarily used as a nuclear weapon. Most plants have a 30 to 40 year operating life. When they are done, we have to disassemble them. We have to get rid of all of the radioactive waste, which will remain radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. In some cases, well beyond what we understand that our society will be something very, very different. So we're making decisions for not just a couple generations from now. We're making decisions that hundreds of generations from now are going to have to still deal with the consequences of. Right now, if you're strongly against nuclear power in general, it could cost about $1 trillion to shut down and deal with all of the waste inside of these plants. So part of the argument for keeping them in place and then not opening new ones is slowly decommissioning them. So how do we actually store this stuff? In the Yucca Mountain, Nevada, we have a burial site for radioactivity. You can't go there, and you don't want to, frankly. Russia has offered to store nuclear waste from other countries. In the Ural Mountains, an explosion there in 1957 actually made that area completely radioactive. And so the idea is, like, how much worse can it get? So they take in other countries' radioactivity there. And remember that we're all people, and we want to have the smallest number of people have to deal with our choices today and the future. So the elephant in the room, right? Nuclear power plants can melt down. It's incredibly uncommon. They are scary when they melt down, and it's kind of this terrifying because it harkens back to nuclear bombs. But when they do melt down, it's usually something that is in a controlled fashion. 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania had a catastrophic failure in the 1970s. That was because of the type of reactor it was controlled. In the Ukraine, Chernobyl, when it melted down, was a less controlled reaction and a less stable reactor. This has led to all kinds of generations of problems. I think it melted down in 1986. That area is still highly radioactive. I had read some couple papers preparing for this lecture. These are tree frogs in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. They're turning different colors. We actually think that these guys are adapting well to the radiation. There have been bacteria that have evolved there that are eating the radiation. And if you look online, you can find all kinds of pictures of the Chernobyl dogs. Super fun side story. Last year, the dogs in Chernobyl were all blue. There was a bunch of blue ones, not all of them. And people were worried that it was a side effect of long-term breeding in a radioactive zone. But it turned out the dogs had all found a porta potty, and they were rolling in the blue dye in the porta potty. So I guess dogs are going to dog. A little bit of a wrap up for this. In New Jersey, I want to point out how we are using electricity today. And our carbon dioxide emissions. This is 1970 right here, and this is 2021. The red dotted line is the total usage of all of our fossil fuels and our emissions. I want to point out here, take a look at what was happening in 1970 was very, very high emissions. Those emissions have dropped substantially in the last 50-ish years. We've started using substantially less coal. This blue line is coal. And we've made up for that by using an awful lot more natural gas, which a little bit cleaner burn. And we also have alternative energy sources. We've been really heavy in the last 10 years in New Jersey putting in solar panels. Hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll move back to having some wind power installed. The plan for New Jersey in the next, I want to say it's by 2050, is to have an environment that is really supporting a sustainable future, but a net zero use of fossil fuels. We talked about net energy. That's the key factor for determining the long-term usefulness of any energy resource. How much is my return on investment? How energy useful is this product? And then how much am I actually getting out of it? The conventional energy that we use has infrastructure in place. There is no startup cost to using it, but it has an alternative of high emissions of greenhouse gases and a lot of other pollutants that are not quite ideal to live with. The challenge would be to find ways to reduce the harmful effects of these as we slowly switch over to a more sustainable use of energy and maybe using only renewables in the future. If we switch to renewables, a lot of this pollutant in the atmosphere question is moot, meaning it doesn't matter anymore. However, we still have to build the infrastructure, and some of that infrastructure is, if you think back to Pebble Mine, some of that infrastructure, building it and obtaining the materials causes a lot of damage. This is a wonderful report on climate change and the effect of switching over to different fuels. This is it's a meta-analysis and with a whole bunch of different scientists reporting on the cost and the benefits of using renewables versus non-renewables. Maybe for a beach read this summer. And then I'd like to go on and talk about renewable energy. I'll end this video here and then come back and talk about some alternatives. Keep in mind, though, it's not as easy as we should just all switch to wind power. There are confounding factors in the way, not just building the infrastructure, but also the fact that people's jobs and lives and everything they own in their homes are already tied into the structure that we already have. So I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you're enjoying this warmer weather. Bye-bye.